This is Keys to the Shop, episode 354, a management masterclass with Ryan Fisher. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. Always happy to have you here, and I would really encourage you to subscribe to Keys to the Shop by hitting the subscribe button wherever you are listening right now. That way you'll always be up to date with new content as it comes out. And also, if you really want to help the show out, sharing these episodes on your social media channels with your friends and peers and coworkers. I mean, this is a great way because it makes everyone more aware of the great content at Keys to the Shop and the fantastic guests that we have, like today's guest, Ryan Fisher. I really appreciate you all doing that. Now, Keys to the Shop, also on top of doing this podcast, works to help you and your business through consulting. Keys to the Shop Consulting helps you build sustainable foundations for excellent operations, quality, and people in your business. Long story short, it's all about creating a thriving coffee shop where all of the pieces work together well. You're avoiding needless mistakes, and whether you're just starting out in the coffee business or you're an existing operator, there's a lot of ways that Keys to the Shop Consulting can walk alongside you and help you either remotely or in person. I would love to have a conversation with you about what that might look like. All you need to do to set up a free discovery call with me is email chris@keystotheshop.com, and we'll talk about what's going on in your world and how working with Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, like you, I appreciate tasting the terroir of a coffee, the soul of a coffee, if you will. Really what the coffee has to offer, I want that in my cup. And when I go to a coffee shop and I order batch brew coffee, sometimes I can get that, but it's really not very consistent. And sometimes it leaves a little room for improvement, and sometimes a lot. This all changes when the coffee that you're drinking actually was brewed on a ground control brewer. The ground control Cyclops brewer is a revolutionary piece of equipment that has leveled up what we can expect from batch brew coffee. The SCA award-winning technology in the ground control allows you the ability to consistently extract a broader range of flavors than you ever thought possible in your coffee. And not only is this an amazing batch brewer, it also increases the efficiency of your coffee bar by allowing you to brew tea, batched iced lattes, batched cold brew. So it's very productive, makes amazing batch brew coffee on top of it, and is awesome to look at as well. So check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee to find out more about this amazing machine. And if you're looking for quality and efficiency and just giving your customers the best possible coffee experience every time, then I suggest you look into getting a ground control Cyclops brewer for your business. Again, for more information, go check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. Now, when you're talking about menu items and what is really on the rise, more and more, of course, it's plant-based beverages. And there is no better option for plant-based beverages out there worldwide than the Pacific Barista series, because it's created for baristas and tested by world-class baristas that really have high standards for how something performs on bar. So the Barista series will stand up to the heat from steaming. It will also produce amazing texture no matter which one of the lineup you choose. The Barista series also keeps the balance of your drink focused on the coffee. So there's not this overwhelming flavor in one direction or the other. It's a great harmony. Your customers are going to absolutely love it. Check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com and get samples in your store to try it. I do believe that if you're looking to serve the best possible plant-based beverages on your coffee menu, then it needs to be the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, today we have a great episode in store for you. Another management masterclass. We focus in on the topic of management, and in this case, we're talking about operations management. We're talking with Ryan Fisher, who is currently the coffee program director at Erewhon in Los Angeles, California. Ryan Fisher is a longtime coffee professional with experience and knowledge throughout the entire coffee supply chain. He is a creative and passionate professional who has an extensive network built through a decade of competing, serving, and judging competitions all around the world, including Cup of Excellence, U.S. Barista Championships, and Cherry Roast. He is currently the coffee program director for Erewhon in Los Angeles, California, and previously had spent nearly 5 years as the operations manager for goodboybob Coffee in Los Angeles. From the beginning of his career, he has been learning about coffee and how to lead people in coffee in parallel. In this conversation today with Ryan, we're going to be talking about, of course, his management experiences. We talk about the early years, learning just how to focus his energies and attention, scaling up from a single location business to a multi-unit business, such as goodboybob Coffee, and all of the different phases of growth that he has gone through and the lessons that he's learned about establishing systems, listening to his staff, caring for people and these businesses as the operations manager. He is a people-focused manager. I love that. He has a lot of humility. And so it was a real honor to welcome Ryan to the show. Here now is my conversation all about management and operations management with Ryan Fisher. Well, Ryan Fisher, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How is your day going so far?
Yeah, it's good. Just sitting at the table, having a little coffee. So doing good.
I'm excited to talk about operations and management, of course. We talk about this a lot on the show. And I think, maybe along with you, with that, management is really important when it comes to creating a great coffee experience for guests and for staff. And so you've got a ton of experience in this area, and you've been in the industry well over a decade. And so let's just kind of start talking a little bit about how your career began to turn toward leadership and management when you were in the coffee industry. How did this all sort of become a focal point for what you focus on in coffee?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I got into coffee a little bit later. I was 30 when I first started working at a coffee shop just as a barista. And, for pretty quickly, I just was approached to kind of take on more leadership and just kind of doing a good job in front of others. And while I was in grad school, I just sort of worked as like a lead at a little cafe in Austin, Texas. Then a few years later, I knew some guys who were looking to take over a coffee shop in Dallas. They needed somebody that could kind of really guide the coffee side of the business while they kind of led on the business side. And so that was like my first real opportunity to lead. And, as I've thought back on it many times since, like I was not prepared, and it was probably way too early for me to really be managing an entire shop. But I feel incredibly grateful for the opportunity because it really kickstarted something in me that I didn't know was quite there, because I was still, at the time, I was working in the academic world at SMU in Dallas and working, in coffee more or less on the side, trying to manage the shop. And so, I think the opportunity to try my hand at building something, not quite from the ground up, but reimagining a shop, really sparked an interest in me kind of just as like an entrepreneur. And so almost from the beginning, I've been taking on kind of leadership roles in working in coffee.
Well, you say that looking back, you think it was too much too soon. What makes you think that?
I think, I had to learn a lot on the fly. And, thankfully I had a staff at that point that was kind of all in the same place, that we kind of learned together. And I guess, in retrospect, that's not a problem. I just literally told somebody yesterday, we only need to be, one step ahead of the people we're training. And so I think I was a step ahead, but I didn't always have, I think, fully formed ideas about what I was trying to do. And so it was a little bit of stop and start at times. And, I was really caught up at that time in trying to do something that I thought was special without really knowing what I thought that was. And so I think it might have just, I probably would have done a much better job if I had had an opportunity to learn underneath more people before. But again, like I mean, I'm incredibly grateful because it gave me an opportunity to really try out my own version of what I was seeing in different places. So maybe I'm, a little conflicted about whether I think it was too early or not, but sometimes I think that.
Never is the perfect time. I think that, yeah, obviously people could have a lot of experience in coffee and then become a manager and still feel the same kind of tension of figuring it out as they're going, right? And you just felt that right from the beginning and having just entered into the coffee industry. But you, like you said, you're 30 when you entered into the coffee industry. And I would say maybe there was a level of maturity that you had toward work that maybe attracted people to the idea of putting you in charge. That it was that part of what you think led people to put you in management positions.
I mean, yeah, I would think so. I mean, I I enjoy working. I've always tried to excel, even if it's not a job that I love. And so I think that certainly has to do with it. I mean, I was probably the oldest person at the cafe I was working at. I'm not certain of that, but I imagine that's the case. Yeah, so I mean, my age and, maturity, I think probably played a big role in that. And I like to try to make things better in general. And so even if I'm not specifically asked to do that, I will weigh in if my opinion is asked for. So I think I've typically taken opportunities to just give input.
So in this situation, in your first year or so as a manager, you're wanting to make things better, but you're also learning coffee. How did you draw distinctions then in terms of what you thought needed to happen, and versus now, when you look at a situation that you enter into and you say, here's some things that we automatically are going to focus on to make it better, versus what you thought was the priority back then?
I think the first thing that really comes to mind is the pace at which I tried to make change back then versus now. Um, I think in my first management position, I thought we could do a lot all at the same time. And it probably created more confusion than was necessary. Like now, I'm part of what I do is bring a lot of change to the company I'm with now, but I'm trying to do it in a very slow and methodical way so that we can roll it out across currently 7 locations, but many more to come. And so I think the pace at which I tried to approach change has changed. I think I've become much more systematic in it and really tried to think through the different ways that it might go. I didn't back then ask for a lot of input from people that I was managing. And now I really try to make sure before I change anything, if I did this, how do you think that would go? How would that work on a day by day basis? Like really trying to understand that the people who implement it probably have a lot of the wisdom that I don't have. And so trying to make sure that gets added in from the beginning rather than as a fix once it's in place.
Mm. I like that you said that. There is a certain kind of need for new managers, especially, to prove themselves through taking on a lot of tasks that will leave a trail that they're hoping will, lead people to, the obvious conclusion that you're a great manager, because you've started all of these projects and you even fixed that thing in the bathroom on top of it all, just um, let me ask then, what do you feel was your first major win as a manager that wasn't necessarily born out of your positional insecurity, but was an actual, like, this is such a great focus, like you would have done it the same way today as you did it then, and how did you know that it was a really good change and project that you had taken on?
Ooh, this is a little tough. I think my answer is that before, so the context for this first management position was we took over a cafe that was like absolutely failing, and it didn't have a very solidified like perspective on coffee. And I knew a little bit about coffee, but to be honest, the cafe that I learned in was not the most stringent when it came to like technique. So I think the first step I took was I reached out to some people and just said, "Hey, I need to learn a bunch. Could I come learn from you?"
Mm.
And so I spent some time learning from James Bailey, who at the time was at Proof Rock in London, and just
Oh yeah.
tried to take like, this is a cafe that is world renowned. So what can I learn even in a short amount of time? And the thing I learned was we have to have an exact like perspective on how we extract our coffee, how we brew espresso. And so essentially what I came back with was, this is our recipe. We now have an exact recipe. This is not, something where every day we just like follow the whim of our palate. And it wasn't like a recipe where you couldn't deviate at all, but we all had to kind of use the recipe to prove the point of this is what it should be today. And so I slowly over a couple months we took baristas with very little or no experience, and we implemented like a 1-to-2 ratio recipe and just kept logs of everything, including like our tasting notes on that, each morning and afternoon and all. And collectively, we all learned that coffee really well by just making sure we were systematic in dialing in every day. And that's super common now. I feel like in 2010, it was a little less. And it for us, it was, I think, revolutionary in helping us actually be proud of the coffee we were serving.
Now, you were convinced of the need for this change through going to other coffee shops, and in particular, the one that James Bailey was working in at Proof Rock. And the people back home, though, who had previously been used to a certain way of doing things, now you have to manage this change.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about how you went about managing change where, were some people resistant to it? And how did you overcome some of that inertia of introducing a new system to an established culture?
I don't remember people being resistant, honestly. I feel like I had the team was like eager. I mean, we took over and like pitched everyone like, this place is going to close or we're going to change, And so I think people were on board with, let's stay in business. And what I remember is just, we had this low boy fridge that kind of served as our worktop right in front of the espresso machine. We would roll it back a little and use a dry erase marker. And I remember literally writing down like 18 in, 36 out, 22 seconds, and then tasting notes. And then the next line for the next, version with a grind change. And I think we did that as a team, like every day for, the entire time I was a part of that company, essentially. And I still, when I train new people, try to use a similar method of like, let's write it down. Let's create some, like something that you can look back on and see what happens. And I think collectively, we just all kind of bought into, let's learn together. I still love dialing in collaboratively. I don't love dialing in and tasting myself and then telling everyone we're ready to go. I want, here, taste this with me. What are you tasting? And that comes from, I think, those initial months managing that change.
As a result of focusing on this as one of the primary changes, did you notice other changes happening in the cafe that contributed to the betterment of the business? Because the failure of the business itself, the imminent failure of the business, probably wasn't only due to the fact that people were not dialing in properly. I imagine there was other things.
Yeah. I think that that was just one system that was lacking that we tried to implement, and we brought in a bunch of systems. I mean, we did full team meetings weekly, just to make sure everyone knew what was happening, what we were doing, why we did it. And I mean, I was also very new to specialty coffee. I feel like at that time, and all the baristas were essentially brand new. And so I think what we tried to do was just make sure everyone knew, like, we're in this together. Let's just take each step we can. Let's serve people really well. One of our main goals, and I don't think at the time I knew how to like really articulate it, but the purpose of the company was to make sure everybody that walked through the door felt welcome.
Yeah.
And that's, I think a lot of businesses feel that way, but we really, like, every barista got to give away a certain number of free drinks a day to people that they seemed like they really just wanted to give something to. And so we tried to create an atmosphere of, we're all in this together, and then bring the customers into that as well.
How did you manage your own time during those first couple of years or so? I mean, well, as an aside, how many years were you there?
I was there about a year and a half, maybe close to 2 years.
So in the beginning, your time is probably just taken up with everything, just like meshing together because it's the big new thing in your life. But as time went on, how did you decide how to prioritize things on a week-to-week basis? Because you're just telling us now this goal of, hey, we want everyone to feel like they're in this together. Now, as a manager, you're making certain decisions on what you resource them with and how you speak to them and other things that are all very purposeful actions. I imagine at some point you're taking time to plan out your week and how you utilize your energy throughout the time there. So how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was that organized then, to be honest. I know that I had the energy of a new project in me and like the excitement of it. And so I think I probably just applied energy toward a lot. But there were two other people who managed sort of the, financial and kind of future sided things. My part of the company was to show up and like manage day to day and to make sure we were serving coffee we were excited about. And so I had a lot on my plate, but it was more or less like show up and just make sure the team is going forward and the coffee is getting out and customers are happy. So it was a bit more of a like in the moment kind of management rather than this huge big picture side of things.
How does accountability work in an environment like that?
I just personally, I like tasting, or like being around people, and I've always tried to demonstrate what I'm looking for rather than just tell. I think this is where I really set about, something I've done for a long time, which is I try to do dishes before anybody else just to show that we all need to carry the load, even if it's something we don't love doing. Cleaning up a spill or, things like that, I create the expectation. I try to create an expectation where we all jump to do things really well and quickly. We don't leave it for somebody else. Like the new hire shouldn't have to do dishes all the time. To me, that's how I've tried to create accountability is just, you can't hide because I don't hide.
And when people do hide, or, I mean, because we're all human and we have energy for new things. And so we're going to slip. So in an environment where we're all in this together and we want to have this sort of professional camaraderie, it's really hard as a manager of a culture like that to seem like you're coming down on somebody. But how do you do that? How do you address somebody and also keep morale up?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I struggle to really remember how I handled a lot of that then. I know we had checklists. I know that we used, things like checklists to make sure everything was going along like it should, I probably just had conversations and was like, hey, the cafe was a mess this morning when I opened. Like, what happened? Um, I know more recently the way I would approach that and really try to hold somebody accountable is before I really try to come down on them. And I'm not perfect about this, but try to hear why it might have happened before I tell them they were really wrong to have not done something.
Why is that important?
I think if people feel like they're heard, then they can hear you. And I know that, when I was first managing, I think I thought I needed to be heard. And I've learned now that that really means that I need to hear people, because they're not usually employees or like people in a business. They're what they're wanting to talk about and what they're feeling. It's not superfluous to what's happening. It's not like they're lost on the topic or the cause. They're feeling it in a different way than somebody who's managing or leading or owning. But they're not, absent-minded when it comes to the real purpose of a business. And so I try, and again, nowhere near perfect on this, but I try to make sure that I hear what they're thinking and saying. Because what I might hear is, I was here an hour closing and this happened, and so that's why it's a mess, and I just couldn't stay an extra 45 minutes to do that as well. And then I understand maybe I'm asking too much out of a closer. Maybe it's time to have an extra closer.
Right. So the question you ask after hearing what their perspective is one that has implications on yourself and the system.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I might, say it is about the close, and it's so what could we do to make a close work better? Is there something we can do before closing? Do you need another person? Are people hanging out way too long? Should we have a cutoff point to get people out of the cafe? Things like that.
No, it's good. And I like that that's where you go with it, because it really does boil down to how are you going to help facilitate a solution. And I think the employees are probably asking that question also. So I'm communicating to you about this. So I'm assuming that because you have a title, that you are going to use that title to my advantage, the advantage of the business. And then sometimes that assumption is ill-founded, unfortunately. But when you became more adept at management and you dove in further into operations management versus cafe management, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like just a single location coffee shop.
It was, yes.
Yes. And so now, when did you make the step to something a little bit more, I would say, logistically challenging? And what changed about the way that you approached management from the single store to something a little bit more complex?
Yeah, that happened at Good Boy Bob. I had never managed more than one location until Good Boy Bob, and we had two cafes and a roastery that I was overseeing about a year and a half, 2 years in. And that's when I really had to start thinking strategically about my time and my week. I couldn't sort of just know that if I'm on site at the one location, things are going to be moving forward. I think that, that's probably about 2018, or sorry, maybe like 2019 going into 2020 when that happened. And I think I probably struggled at first with handling so many logistical elements because I couldn't be on site everywhere every day. And I learned that I needed to trust people that I had asked to lead. And that's when I began to really learn to allow a lot of, not a lot of mistakes, but allow people to make choices, perhaps make a mistake, and then coach on how to do it better the next time. Because I certainly have made a ton of mistakes. And so why shouldn't I allow others to, do the same and grow, like take the opportunity to grow while they're working and not expect perfection out of anybody.
Okay, so it feels like there's a tension when you've got a big um, multi-unit operation like Good Boy Bob, and you say you want to give people room to learn and have these coachable moments, which means that there's going to be some, lowercase f fails in there. But in the beginning, this is true for me, I think, also in management in my history in coffee, where I felt the same need to like be there, and I can't let there be any kind of crack in the facade because that would lead to disaster. Like any kind of failing or shortcoming in this single unit location was a lot more stringent when I had complete vision of everything. But it feels like the fact that you could not control everything, you physically couldn't do that. It forced you to have to like allow for some moments where people did make mistakes, which from a perspective of an owner is like, oh, but that means our brand is not being seen in the right light. And so help me with the idea of allowing for people to make decisions that are not ideal, but in the end it like benefits the business more when you do that versus having to control everything, especially in a business that size where it feels like there's so much on the line.
Yeah, I mean, two things come to mind. One is the owner of Good Boy Bob from the beginning told me that he wanted to take risks. And so we had, I think, just as part of the culture of the company, we were going to take risks, which meant we would probably have some lowercase fails. And we were okay with that. The second thing that comes to mind is I had an incredibly stable team. And there was a point in time going into the expansion where we were the exact same team for like 16 or 18 months in a row. And I think when you have a team that's that stable, you can, like, the trust level just grows, maybe not exponentially, but just grows and grows. And so knowing that I had opened and closed and dialed in and done all the things with this team for so long, the trust level was just there where I could be at the roastery for an entire day and know that they would call if something, was going wrong. And there were two really great assistant managers that I had in place at the time. And I really believed in their abilities. And, they would call when they needed me. I would try to coach them through how to handle it because I knew all along, my dad he's been a business owner forever, and he always told me, and I know it's this entrepreneurial kind of guideline, but basically don't create a job, create a business. And it's like, don't lock yourself into having to do everything. And I'm probably saying that a little bit incorrectly, but it's essentially don't require yourself to be a part of everything. You have to create systems and empower other people. And so that's what I was trying to do, is follow that guideline of there's no way we will get to multiple stores and all stores running well if I think I'm the only one that can do it.
You mentioned how you trusted their abilities and this idea of calling you when things aren't going right, trusting their abilities. It begs the question, at least in my mind, what did you do in order to first determine what the standard was? And then how do you verify the trust that you put in people? Because I could be a new owner and take your words and say, well, I'm just going to promote this person to manager. I'm just going to just blindly trust their ability, because that's what you're supposed to do. So what was that trust based on, and how did you all arrive at a standard that everyone was always so clear on?
Yeah, I mean, probably was not always so clear, to be honest, but I think the way that I arrived there was one of the assistant managers was my very first hire at Good Boy Bob. So at that point, it's like 2+ years of working alongside him. And the other was not long after. And the two of them, I had sort of identified fairly early that they were just great people to be around. They worked really hard. The team respected them, and then gave them kind of a shift lead role, showed them what was needed there, verified that they could fulfill and take care of things like making sure the cafe got closed down correctly or opened correctly, or handle me being out of town for a weekend. So the verification kind of came with smaller requirements at first, and then just grew over time. I started involving them in every hiring decision. They would go through an interview, and only if they thought that somebody was a good candidate would I get involved. And then kind of collectively we would talk through, how would they fit in a team? What strengths do we see them having? Things like that. I would have them handle smaller issues with the staff, and I would sit in but coach. So I just tried to take the small opportunities to give them an opportunity to learn how to do it, but with me not absent, just not necessarily saying much during the moment, and then coaching them on it after.
Why is it important that you coach after and not in the moment?
I think what reason I've approached that is that I don't think I'm necessarily perfect in a moment either. So maybe like asking them why they approached it this way. We also, like, say it was a disciplinary issue with a coworker, then we would have prepared and talked ahead of time. How do you want to handle this? And really walk through it. But I think after it becomes, it's just an opportunity to say, hey, how do you think that went? I think maybe when this happened, you could have handled it like this. I don't know if I necessarily love the idea of jumping in and kind of taking over to coach in the moment. I like to allow them to really seize the opportunity and learn from it in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense, because it would be kind of embarrassing too, wouldn't it?
I think so. It could be, yeah.
And it would make it seem like you extend trust, but then you take it back, which happens a lot.
That's true.
Well, your role as an operations manager eventually had to reach a point where it was just kind of humming along, where in the beginning, I imagine you're just kind of trying to figure out, little pieces of what your job description were going to look like, and also their job description and how you interact one to the other. How did that creation process happen? It sounds like we've heard some of that as we've been chatting here. And then where did it end up to make a distinction between operations management versus cafe management?
Yeah, I think we were humming along going into COVID, and I think we were doing, like, I was so proud and so excited for what we were about to do, but that, like, the beginning of COVID is when we were, like, basically expanding to location number 2. And so, location number 3, it became very messy and very hard because what had been working no longer worked. And so, I think so much of the success we had got lost because the dynamics of everything changed. So it's really hard for me looking back now to kind of see what we did before and really understand it, because it felt like it became so complicated. I mean, now it's hard to even realize how long we've been in this kind of new context, but 2.5 years of having to be so flexible that systems sometimes feel like they're almost counterproductive, but you still have to have them. And I think, maybe to get back to the question, that the the cafe management, I think, it requires somebody who is just really flexible and able to sort of put out fires and like meet needs on a daily basis. And so we leaned heavily on systems like this is how we open, making sure we shadowed somebody all the way through a couple weeks worth of training so that the expectations were clear, and then everyone overseeing them knew that they could trust it. When I got to having to be over multiple stores, it became a lot more intuitive for me. I relied on my intuition a lot because it was me doing it rather than somebody else. And I think at times that got messy for people because I wasn't as systematic in what I was doing, but I was looking for systematic behavior from others. And so I think, the beginning stages of overseeing multiple stores and kind of taking on sort of a director of ops type role, it took time for me to learn how to do it because I just grew into it because we grew. And again, having great managers is what kept us going. But then very quickly we were in COVID and it was just like survival mode.
I want to get to COVID for sure, but I'm interested in leaning into the idea of a bit more of how were you able to discern the messiness of you being intuitive but expecting systematic behavior. And I'm asking that because I feel like, and this is something I do with my clients, is we talk about an owner's job description and figure out like what your schedule is going to be. But that's not very common. There's a lot of loosey-goosey, vision, that stuff happening at the higher end of leadership. So when did you really start to realize and notice or even articulate to yourself that this is what was happening and that you needed to systematize your own self in order to alleviate some of that messiness?
I don't remember exactly when. I do remember starting to put my location on the schedule for everyone so they knew where I was. I did all the roasting at first when we kicked off our own in-house roasting program. And so, everyone knew Monday, Tuesday was at the roastery. And then kind of the other days I was going to be split between the locations. I think it just took a little bit of time for me to settle in and know how to walk into a cafe, not overstep with, if a manager's on site, trusting that they're going, giving the feedback to them, letting them disseminate, jumping in on a rush if necessary. I think for me, I've wanted to work a role or a process or a system myself first before I codify it and turn it into something. And so I have had a tendency to let it be a little amorphous at the beginning and then try to implement something based off of experience. I don't think that you can kind of bring cookie cutter solutions. And so sometimes I've maybe leaned too heavily on the intuition part at the beginning, and everyone maybe has suffered around me because of that. But I do think that I've tried to bring a system out of that before it gets too far down the road. To your question, it's hard for me to say exactly when that happens. I think, a few weeks into something, you start to understand the kind of ebbs and flows. But I think I've trusted that if I put something in place and I am allowing others to make mistakes, then maybe they will let me make mistakes. And if I own it and apologize if I need to, then I can adjust as we go. So long as I'm communicating through the process and making sure that people understand what we're trying to do.
It feels like there's always going to be a little bit of messiness involved.
Yeah.
And not having that is an unrealistic expectation to a certain degree.
I think so.
Yeah. And to your point about an amorphous kind of system birthing process, basically, like
Yeah.
you have cookie cutter solutions, and they are out there simply because there are universals that apply to things like communication or inventory, like we all know FIFO and stuff like that. However, not everybody has the same sized shelves,
Hmm.
and not everyone has the same schedule and people, etc. And so those things throw a wrench into the idea that you could potentially build your system before living it and have no atmospheric drag.
Yeah. I think we often would put a system in place, but basically tell everybody this may not work like we think. So please give feedback, and I think that's acceptable. I definitely don't love the idea, and I used to be this person of expectation or expecting people to be perfect or to like really nail it every time. And I have had that expectation on myself for most of my life, and I've learned how to deal with that. But I don't love that as like a business model because, like you said, messiness is, I think, fairly normal, but also like even like week to week or month to month, things change. And I would say some of the more insightful solutions I've ever had in a business were not mine. They came from people who were doing the job every day for 3 months and then said, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?" And it's like, no, I don't know how I haven't, but you're right. And so I think having a bit of flexibility in a system allows people to question it. And, then like it requires having a good system for how you question things. And that can be difficult in its, own way. But I like to allow enough space for somebody to be themselves, including myself, but give them enough structure that they don't languish or wander and they know what is expected of them.
Yeah, it feels like if you give somebody enough space to be themselves, at least in some ways, you're helping them and everyone become us, become the brand, right? So back to the COVID thing, when things kind of hit the fan, and it was similar for a lot of people. I feel like the coming together of staff was a common thing. Communities that supported local coffee shops were the same way. For a lot of us, I don't know, in corporate world of coffee, I don't know if it was the same, probably not. But um, what changed in terms of management that lingers or has lingered, and probably is going to be the new status quo that was the most challenging? You mentioned the excessive, if I could use that word, excessive flexibility. Um, but what describe that and how you found solutions in the moment that worked to create at least a method to help Good Boy Bob and those still involved with it during the time survive it.
Oh, I mean, to be honest, managing through COVID exhausted me and came close to breaking me, Chris. I think it was the there were so many just anxieties that were work related but not necessarily fully understood even, and the needs to try and get money into people's pockets. So trying to open, but everyone's afraid of being open, trying to keep customers coming but not too close. Like it just, the tensions were constant, and I'm not sure that there were always strategies on like a day by day basis, but everyone did. We had to pivot constantly. And so it felt like remaking systems constantly. The thing I tried to do, and, anybody that worked for me during the time can have their own feelings about how this went, is I tried to just hear how people were doing. If you didn't want to work, you could not work and you weren't going to lose your job. We would do what we could, facilitate whatever you needed. We pivoted to like doing a ton of delivery of like full meals and like online cooking classes and like hosted dinner parties and like happy hours for people and just things like that. And so it required us all to learn a new thing. The team as a whole was incredibly flexible and just willing to do what it took. And so, you know, one week you might be doing a bunch of driving around the city to deliver meal kits. And then the next week, you know, we'd have no work. And so I don't, honestly, a lot of it, I don't remember how we managed it. We just tried to be as clear as possible about what was going on while hearing what everybody was feeling. That team that I mentioned earlier that was together for like 18 months, this was kind of the end of that team, and it was incredibly sad. Some of them never came back to us after COVID. They moved away. Some did. But that was, I mean, I don't even, at times during the last 2.5 years, I feel like I don't even know how to lead a team anymore because it became so difficult and everything just became so layered with anxieties that it became really difficult for me to do.
I would like to make an observation, and I feel like from what you've described earlier in the conversation, it may have contributed to your at least being able to hear effectively your staff and have a culture where people felt like you were really caring for them in the midst of this, because you had been practicing it beforehand with the way that you would describe trusting people or listening to people. And I would say maybe a lot of people are in that boat where if they had been practicing something and then they needed to rely extremely heavily on that thing during COVID, like communication and listening to people, having these conversations, it was easier for them than people who had not been doing that, not been having meetings, not trusting their employees, and then all of a sudden wanting to have a lot of heart-to-hearts in conversations. And even so, with all that preparation, like you described, like it stripped you of a lot of energy to do that. What does it look like now for your perspective on management post, well, we say quote unquote post pandemic, in the wake of what was a just that singularity of crap. Now, how do you process this?
I think I'm a little more aware of sort of the daily feelings or anxieties of somebody showing up that's, say, like an hourly worker. Maybe more than I was before, because before it felt like we were all kind of moving towards a common goal. And I wonder if maybe now that assumption of all of us being on the same page, if I don't quite have the same assumption, not in a negative way, but just understanding that so-and-so that is maybe afraid of catching COVID because of somebody in their family, being, at higher risk or something. I just try to be aware of that in a different way now, where like I can ask what I need of them, but they also have the ability to tell me what they also need in a new way. I think the main thing I've learned out of this is just to allow space for people, even more than before, to be who they are and to process things that they need to process, to have a bad day and not overreact to it. Because I mean, it does feel in a lot of ways like it's post-pandemic, but it's not. I mean, we just had to deal with it a bit at one of our locations and lost half the staff for a week because of contact and all. And so that creates so many rippling stresses that I tried to just, right now, it's like don't turn those stresses into anything more than they already are. Always try to understand how to just relieve the stress, rather than maybe following, a guideline exactly a certain way to deal with maybe something that happens. Maybe try to find the way to just diffuse so that we can all take the next breath and the next step and get back to it. I think that's how I've changed with the way I oversee and manage now. I'm trying harder than I ever have before to just make sure people are feeling good as they walk through a door to work, and that when they leave, they can, feel good about going on about the rest of their day.
Talk to me about the ROI on this. In that, it sounds very crude to even mention that in this conversation, because what we're talking about is a very emotional and very human thing. And yet we are in a business that has the need to make money, as is illustrated by the fact that you are trying to get people paid as much as possible, because it's a real human need too. When you're taking all this extra time to focus on what people need and de-stressing, et cetera, I think, and I'll just play devil's advocate here and say, well, isn't that kind of getting in the way of the momentum of the business? Like, leave it at the door. If you open the gate, everyone's just going to take advantage of it. We're just going to have this big old sit-in where we hold hands and talk about our feelings, and we're not working. So I hope maybe that's a scarecrow and maybe not steel manning the argument there, but I feel like there's this aspect where we want to be really practical and say, let's be about business. And what do you say to that? Is there a longer term benefit to this more sensitive approach to caring for staff that someone looking purely at the numbers and the efficiency of the operation might be missing?
Well, I mean, I would say that what you just described is definitely possible. I don't think that's the version that I'm going for. Even for myself, the idea of leaving something at the door can be therapeutic, even like taking a break from what's going on. And I don't mean to say that it's like a love-in, like sit in, just let's talk about emotions. But I also do think that it can be valuable and powerful if an employee understands that they can maybe say, hey, could I put a different hat on with you for a second and just tell you how hard it is for me to show up every day? Okay, cool, do that, and I will not hold that against you. The return on that, I think, is employee retention. Like, I don't know of anything that can be more directly related to retaining customers than employee retention. Like, quality, I would almost say, is not even as important as employee retention. And if you walk through the door in a service type place like a coffee shop and you see the same person every day, then I think that trust level just goes up over time. Even beyond that, you have the relationship that person can build. And so I think what I'm after is employee retention. I want, and I've believed this for a long time, if employees are happy, they like what they're serving, they're proud of what they're doing, they feel welcomed, they feel like they're part of what's going on, then they portray that to a customer. And that is the business model. Like, early on at Good Boy Bob, I told the owner, we're not a coffee company, we're a people company. We're really selling connection, and we use coffee to do that. And I do believe that. I think that if we can retain employees and we make them feel like a part of what we're doing, then we get more out of them than we ever know. But without treating them poorly and treating them like they're simply a commodity or a cog in the system. I personally hate having to replace people. I don't love high turnover because of just the inconsistencies that it breeds, and it breaks the system over and over, in my opinion. So I have just tried to build my systems around keeping people for as long as possible.
Well said. Yeah. And if you're selling connection, then you sure better be practicing connection too.
Yeah. I mean, the greatest thing we ever did at Good Boy Bob was we had a group of regulars that fought over how close they were to the staff, essentially, and how many of their friends they had brought in. Because you walked in and we were all laughing and having a great time, but pumping out drinks with a line that didn't end. And a customer can be drawn into that in, I think, a really unique way. And once that starts to really solidify, it becomes a blast to work. You're making good money, great tips, but you're also just like, I really like the people that are shopping here, that are coming in. And I think that's like the most proud I've been of something I built, is when that was like humming along and people could wait 30 and 40 minutes in line and not even care because they were like your friend that wanted to see you today. And coffee is just how we made that happen.
I think we could probably talk a long time
Yeah.
on operations, and I do really love your perspectives on managing people and systems and how they're so intertwined. And I guess as we wrap up here, my question would be that somebody is going to be appointing an operations manager out there, or somebody's going to enter into operations, having a higher level management role. Talk to us about what someone who may be going into operations management should expect of themselves, and also maybe what they should be expecting from the owners as well. So, things they should focus on, keys to success for them entering into this position. How would you advise them?
I would really just encourage them to get as much clarity on what is expected of them as possible. An owner or a upper level management person that you're going to be reporting to has an idea of what they want done. And I viewed my job often as kind of an interpreter of that, especially if, the owner hasn't worked in the field. And so I think just truly understanding the expectation, understanding what how they'll judge you, what sort of metrics they're going to use to evaluate the job you're doing. I think as much clarity as you can have for that in that realm as it's better to have more. I think for yourself, the expectation should be that you're gonna make some mistakes, that you're gonna also have some wins. You've got to get people on the same team. The way that I personally judge whether I'm doing a good job or not is whether I have a team of people moving in the same direction, because every business's metrics are going to be so different. So, I can judge myself on a daily basis as, are we moving forward? It might take a while to really see that ROI, but are we taking legitimate steps forward? And I think that you need to have an expectation that misunderstanding will probably be common in the beginning. So your job is really to go out of your way to figure out how to understand what is happening. I've referenced it. I started pretty recently with Erewhon. I didn't make a single decision in the first 6 weeks of the job because I viewed my entire job, the entire thing I was trying to do is just understand what was going on. I did not want to make any decisions before I saw and learned. And I interviewed people of all levels through the process, trying to understand what needs to be done, what problems have you seen, what have we done well, what can we capitalize on with customers. So just making sure that you are listening well, you go out of your way to make sure you're communicating clearly. I think being flexible is probably the right answer to any of these questions at any time, understanding that you have to be able to adapt. I can't bring what I did at Good Boy Bob to Erewhon. There are lessons I learned there, but I can bring them, but I have to remake them in order to apply them. So I think that would be kind of the way I would advise somebody, but also like search for people who are doing a great job and like quickly get behind them because they've already been there as well. And I really don't like the idea when somebody comes in and they just wholesale try to make changes and they undercut people who are doing a great job. So I definitely don't want to do that if I'm taking over a new project.
I love it. Thank you so much, Ryan. There's so much wisdom that you shared from a lot of experience that so many of us will end up going through, and maybe some of us have already been through it, but I think what you've shared has helped us really make sense of some of the things that we've experienced in the industry. And certainly anyone entering into management or operations management is going to be better for having listened to this episode today. So thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Well, everybody, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. So much to take away here, and especially I think the idea that when we're talking about managing people, we're talking about leading people and serving them, and we're talking about making sure that we are flexible and doing things in a people-first manner. That is a default position that Ryan has taken throughout his career, and it's definitely served him well, and certainly the people that he's been able to lead as a manager serve them well also. And finally, I can't echo enough just how important that last bit of information he shared was in terms of the clarity you have to get from ownership about what your role is, and keeping a disposition of listening and curiosity about those you are leading. I think if you just take what Ryan's suggested here in this conversation and his advice to us to heart, you are simply going to be a better manager. So a huge thank you to Ryan Fisher for joining us on the show. And if you want to send me any kind of feedback about today's episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. And now, speaking of Los Angeles, and that's where our guest today, Ryan, is based out of, that is one of the locations for the upcoming Coffee Fest trade show. Coffee Fest has been operating as a trade show and an indispensable resource for the specialty retail community for 30 years here in 2022. That's 3 decades of resourcing coffee shop entrepreneurs just like yourself with the tools and insights they need to be successful. At Coffee Fest trade shows, there are a ton of free and accessibly priced workshops, trainings, lectures, and seminars that will help energize and equip you and your team. There's also the trade show floor where you get to interact with great vendors. There's a community of like-minded coffee people that you get to talk with, as well as the competitions like latte art and cold brew. So much going on, and you need to check it out over at coffeefest.com. You can get actually 50% off your registration by using the code KEYS when you go to register yourself and your team at coffeefest.com. Again, use the code KEYS when you are registering, and you get 50% off your registration fee. I can't recommend this highly enough. I'm going to be at every show, so I hope to see you there. Go check them out, coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of today's show. Thanks everyone so much for joining me on this management masterclass with Ryan Fisher. I hope you have an awesome day. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.